today the Nigerian government makes an indication to increase pump price, the first reaction will be for Labour to send a strike notice. Then you begin panic buying and all of that. But have you paused to ask, why are we all so sensitive to price of petroleum products? An expert on this show today links that panic and worry to the country's weak public transportation system. If there's an efficient and effective intermodal transport system, you would likely not bother, because movement would be in mass transit and cost will be so insignificant. On Big Story this week, we turn our attention to the revitalizing rail transportation and the implication for national economy and development. You want to stay tuned because it will be quite informative. I'm Olu Phillips. Welcome. These are very familiar sights and sounds you can find in major city centers across Nigeria. Trading, display of wares, vehicular movement, all happening simultaneously and has become a constant. But did you also notice that this is occurring side by side rail tracks and in some cases right on top of the metal lines? So where the trains have refused to pound and grind on tracks, it has other uses. One reason clearly will suffice. Trains and the rail systems in Nigeria as a means of transportation do not by any way of impressive statistics command a huge demand, whether for passenger purposes or haulage use anymore. But it didn't used to be the case many years back.
When the Nigeria Railway Corporation was functioning, that it was really a different way to get about in the country. I used it. I've used it to go to Lagos. I've used it to go to Kano. And we're not talking about like before the war, as everybody says. This was really after the war. I went to Kano sometime in the 70s with it as a young boy. And I went to Lagos with it. It was just a joyous way to ride, although because it was narrow gauge, it took a longer time. In most countries, it is the way to go and a way to ensure that the road system is safe and saved from destruction. Because the sort of traffic that you see on the on the roads these days shouldn't be on the road. The heavy haulage system could go on the rail network. So at that time, it was quite nice to travel by rail. Plus also, it created a lot of job opportunities. You had craftsmen all over the place, welders, different craftsmen that worked on the rail system. You could get plumbers, welders, electricians, all with best level of certification from the Nigerian Railway Corporation at the time. And they were stationed at various places. They were stationed here in Enugu, in Port Harcourt, in Kaduna, in Kano, in Lagos, all doing very well. And in fact, in Enugu here, you had railway quarters. And it was for such people that such a place was created.
I recall that as a young boy, as a student, once we closed for holidays, you will find many students at the railway station. Some are going to the north, some are going to the south, some are going to all parts of the country. And it was always a beehive of activities. Most of the goods moved from one part of the country to another were moved through the railways. They were very, very important. It was, in fact, one of the economic backbones of this country at that time. Somewhere along the line, I think something happened in this country and we sort of missed our priorities. The railways should have been one of the priorities of this country, but somehow attention was not paid to it. It died gradually. It was not so sudden as such.
The Nigerian railway system has suffered a long-term decline as a result of competition from road transport, which has eroded the rail traffic. It has deteriorated and now accounts for 1% of transport services in the country. Rail passengers declined from 15 million in the mid-1980s to about 1.5 million by the year 2000, and most likely about 1 million in 2007. Freight traffic declined from a high of 3 million tons in the mid-1960s to 117,000 tons in 2000. The amount of freight carried by the railway in the year 2000 was equivalent to only 0.4% of the throughput of the ports in the year 2000 and less than 0.1% of the throughput in 2010. The amount of freight carried had declined due to deterioration of the level of service and competition from the road transport and the poor condition of the infrastructure and rolling stock. The Apapa gridlock, which has extended to many parts of the state and has remained so despite several pronouncements, is a visible consequence. Why rail, and why give serious thought to transportation?
The rate of development of the economy is actually tied to the rate of development of the infrastructure, transport infrastructure, I mean. If your transport infrastructure is weak, your economy is going to be weak because it affects movement of goods, services, and of course it affects the velocity of your economy. And the velocity of your economy is also tied to the velocity of money. So the rate of change, rate of movement of goods, services from one point to the other is also what's going to affect the rate of development of your economy, and hence things like productivity is affected, job creation is affected, employment is affected. So what needs to take 1 hour, if it's taking 5 hours, it's taking a whole day. You know, the implication of that to an average man on the street is that if you're supposed to produce 20,000 goods in a day, you end up producing maybe 1,000. And therefore, jobs is affected, productivity is affected, economy is affected, and ultimately, you know, affecting your GDP. And if you look at it all around the world, the most developed economies around the world have very well developed transport system. If you look at a country like UK, with a population of 66 million, thereabout, they have over 15,000 kilometers of rail network. If you look at a country like Germany, about 83 million population, they have over 45,000 kilometers of rail network. Nigeria as a country today, we're almost 200 million. We have barely 3,500 kilometers of rail. This is very, very low compared to our population, compared to our GDP. And even the 3,500 kilometers that we have is not fully functioning. Barely 10% of that is mobilized for national movement and the economy. So hence one of the reasons why this economy has not been so slow and of course sluggish.
The first rail in Nigeria was opened in 1898 between Lagos and Abeokuta, a distance of 96 kilometers, and was built by the British in line with other colonies in Africa. That's over 100 years these tracks have been laid. So if rail as well as other forms of transportation is linked directly to economic growth, then something has to be done. In November 2010, the government of Nigeria, led by Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, requested the African Development Bank, AFDB, to prepare a report on the state of infrastructure in the country, having identified and prioritized the need to meet the demand for critical infrastructure facilities across the board. The report, entitled An Infrastructure Action Plan for Nigeria, Closing the Infrastructural Gap and Accelerating Economic Transformation, provides a detailed assessment of the current status of services in 4 key infrastructural sectors in the country and their role within the West African region, namely transport, electric power, information and communication technologies, water and sanitation. Then the government embarked on some upgrades, namely The Western Line, that is, the Lagos to Kano, a 1,224-kilometer line completed and still functional. The Eastern Line, comprising Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, completed by 2013. The Itakpe-Ajokuta-Warri standard gauge rail line, in addition to some 25 new locomotives procured, an additional 200 coaches and wagons reported to have been refurbished. As a result, available data shows that the number of passengers carried by the rail system rose significantly from about 1 million in 2009 to about 4.2 million in 2012. These efforts aligned significantly with the 25 years master plan for rail development in Nigeria.
I intentionally asked you to come to the office. For those of you who live in maybe in Lekki Island, will not know what we do along these houses. Before the commencement of the modernization stage, that the construction of the standard gauge, we were running 22 trains a day, carrying close to 10,000 passengers in Lagos every day, Friday to Monday to Fridays. We run Port Harcourt, Aba, and we run Kaduna, Mina. And we run the standard gauge, that is Abuja to Kaduna, the popular one. And we now run a return trip from Iwari to Itakpe and back 3 times a week. That's what we are doing. And within those things for passengers, we are moving containers, we are moving goods. We are trying our best to also help in decongesting the ports and decongesting the roads.
The Lagos-Kano lines and Port Harcourt-Maiduguri tracks are operational, though skeletal, and are run on what is known as the narrow gauge tracks, the ones built over 100 years ago and rehabilitated by the previous administration. Then there's another track called the standard gauge, which is what the present government has been pursuing in line with the 25 years master plan earlier set up. For instance, the Lagos to Ibadan, which the minister says he is upbeat about its completion later in the year, is a standard gauge track.
Lagos to Ibadan will cost about $1.6 billion. That will not include the extra cost of things we did not prepare for, we did not see in the valuation. Then the Kaduna Abuja to construct it cost us about $1 billion. We've also paid, we have awarded a contract of $500 million to buy locomotives and rolling stock for Lagos Ibadan. And I can't remember how much we spent buying rolling stock for Kaduna Abuja. That's what we've so far spent. So all those noise you hear, we say $8.something billion, $7 billion, they are not just there. It's just these are things we borrowed. And I don't think it will be more than up to $3 billion so far.
I remember the railway company and compound in Ebute Metta with a lot of nostalgia. My uncle used to work there and live there also. To our little minds then, he was very rich. Today, that's not exactly what it is. Many of them suffered the consequences of a challenged cooperation. In recent times, however, the rail systems and operations appear to be on its way to permanence again, but that will require huge funds and dedication. And here is how. Let us help you make sense of the difference between the narrow gauge and the standard gauge. The gauge is the distance or width between the inner sides of the rails. And there are about 4 different categories. Broad gauge has a width of 1,676 millimeters to 1,524 millimeters, or 5 feet 6 inches. The standard gauge measurement has a width of 1,435 millimeters and 1,451 millimeters, or 4 feet 8 inches. The meter gauge width is 1,067 millimeters, or 3 feet and 6 inches. The narrow gauge has a width between 762 millimeters and 610 millimeters, or 2 feet 6 inches. The narrow gauge railways usually cost less to build because they are usually lighter in construction, using smaller cars and locomotives, as well as smaller bridges, smaller tunnels, and tighter curves. Broader gauge railways, a direct opposite of the narrow gauge, are generally more expensive to build, but are able to handle heavier and faster traffic, which is what is being built from Lagos to Kano, but broken down to Lagos-Ibadan owing to budgetary constraints. It is also what you have with the Kaduna to Abuja train services on Nigeria's first ever standard gauge rail track to go into operation. The 187-kilometer line is the first segment of the planned Lagos-Kano standard gauge railway to be completed, which was started in the previous administration.
If you plan to do Lagos-Ibadan and you're looking at $8.7 billion, $8.7 billion would be between 3 and 4 trillion naira. How much is the budget of the country? So you just do 1,003 to 500 kilometers of railway. So if you, that's why I say we need about between 35 to 45 billion dollars to be able to do Lagos to Kano, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, Lagos to Calabar, and then Abuja to Warri. Once you do these 4 tracks, you've covered the country.
But should the start of a new system mean the death or jettisoning of the old?
With the remedial something we have on the narrow gauge, we are transferring to the standard gauge. That's why we are able to run Kaduna Abuja successfully. We are able to run Itakpe Warri successfully. But if you have said, okay, we want to go to standard gauge, stop the narrow gauge, maybe at the time we will not even have the rail. We'll forget about even train operation in Nigeria. That's what I said. Now that the standard gauge is coming on, we should continue with the drive and continue to do what we can do on the narrow gauge. Because there are some places that without the train, there's a place called Kutuwenji, there's no road, nothing. People only go there, people live there.
What state is that?
In Niger State. Even with the way we are running slow, it's faster to go by rail from Minna to Kaduna.
There's a lot of emphasis, I must say, on developing the standard gauge rail in terms of the railway. But I want to say that we should also put on the narrow gauge. Nigeria has
what we already have.
Yes, we have today 3,500 kilometers of the narrow gauge, which connect Lagos to Kano and of course Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. This is, for me, the quickest way by which you can move things around. The track is already there. All we need to do is to get in there, fix this track, procure the wagons, and let the service start. Government have tried, of course, they haven't been successful at this in the past 3 years. They brought in General Electrics. At some point, they pulled out. I think at this point, the Nigerian government needs to take this project seriously and actually go in, invest in this rail, and then get this thing moving. That is the quickest way. Yeah, the Lagos-Kano standard gauge is a very good project, it's laudable, but it's going to take more time. So I think what we need to do now is focus more on that narrow gauge, while we turn the standard gauge with Lagos to Kano to something like a medium to long term. But the short and the medium term, we should take over this narrow gauge as a country. We can afford it. We should put that back in track, put wagon on it, and that way we can effectively distribute goods and services across the length and breadth of this country.
No sooner have passengers begun enjoying the services of the Kaduna to Abuja has it been hit by crisis of an overstretched facility owing to the level of insecurity on the lands.
I think it is time that we patronize our local manufacturers and see the possibility of how they can produce coaches.
Another concern is how soon the completion of the Lagos-Ibadan lines will translate to the decongestion of Apapa. Because for that to happen, inland ports have to be built outside of Lagos where these containers can be dropped and picked up. Stations have to be built and other ports have to be functional as part of an integrated transport policy approach to the sector. Rail transport is not the end in itself, but a means. The greater challenge is the lack of intermodality of trips. Most city travelers have limited options of traveling by rail or by ferry for metropolitan locations, as well as the absence of comprehensive and integrated urban mass transit public transportation system.
public transport formula is very simple. 60 people owning a car, put all these people in a bus. So you eliminate 60 cars and put everybody just in one bus. So that way you can reduce the number of vehicles on the road, you reduce congestion, you reduce travel time, and life becomes more bearable. And that's what has been successfully demonstrated in the West. So they get to go on the bus or train. But why is it that we don't have that in Nigeria? And the answer is simple. A lot of time our government does not see the relationship between public transport and the fact that the economy of the country is enhanced if you get more people to embrace public transport.
Given that an increasingly large majority of Nigerians are expected to be living in urban areas by 2020, it becomes imperative that measures be conceived and applied to anticipate this major urban mobility challenge. The much talked about Lagos-Ibadan is just a segment of the Lagos-Kano and over 1,500 kilometer tracks to be laid.
Rail be the catalyst in development and be the major carriers of goods. So we have to do more than what we are doing and to ensure that we link as much states and community by rail as quick as possible. And when we do this, not only the road will last longer, even human being, if you travel by rail, it's not the expectation or what you experience by roads that you experience by rail. When you are seated on a coach in a rail, you have your peace of mind. I don't know who impact it plays on or play on your head. So I believe with the same attitudes the present government have put in place to ensure that we don't stop expansion of a modern rail track. We should continue like that. We should also encourage the state and local government, nothing to mind, to say, okay, for rail development we are contributing, because the money you spend on rehabilitation of road year in, year out can be saved if you have a working, very functional rail system in Nigeria. So we should look at it that way, and nothing wrong in even setting aside and say, okay, from earnings of anywhere we earn money, that ports, oil, and so forth. For us to develop the rail, let's keep this aside and make sure we get it. And who knows, if you say, okay, float a bond, somebody will say, okay, 2 naira, 2 naira, 3 kobo, 1 naira, 3 kobo. We will be able at least to raise some funds.
If the master plan is to be followed through, all major cities in Nigeria are to be connected via standard gauge tracks with attendant billions of dollars to accomplish over several years. Nigeria must cash in on quick wins and galvanize the economy for growth and development. From that document by the Africa Development Bank in 2010, which seemed to capture in most vivid terms the routes Nigeria should travel in terms of its journey towards transformation of critical sector, the urban population of Nigeria is projected to continue to grow at 4% a year in the decade ahead to a total of 116 million people by 2020. Already we have crossed the 200 million population mark. And so the 47 major cities in Nigeria will bear the burden of that population burst. Catering for their movement would also require substantial improvement and expansion in the urban transport infrastructure and services. The Nigerian railway system has the potential to provide an effective and cost-efficient means of transportation, particularly on long-distance routes serving density traffic flows. Other African countries are doing it. We can square up to that challenge. After all, we are Big Brother Africa. Thanks for joining The Right today. Make it a date with us next week. Bye for now.